Good morning, friends. Lou, good morning.
Good morning. How are we doing today?
Good. We have a very exciting, fascinating, surprising story for you today. Um, Many people hang up or give up after just a minute or two of listening. This is one, friends, you shouldn't. This is
Okay.
going to be very, very interesting to you. I found this story very interesting when I first heard about it, and I did a lot of research over the years about it. And you may want to also. It's about a dead prince who was brought back to life by some swamis.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's
It'll be interesting.
fascinating.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Lou, this is the most celebrated case in the history of the British Raj in colonial India. So you can imagine
Yeah.
the most celebrated case in the history of the British colonization of India, most celebrated. It was all over the newspapers in England, all over the newspapers in India. This is going back to the early 1900s when the British ruled over India. If you look at the research in the court cases that were held after this prince came back to life and said, "This kingdom is mine," there are 26 volumes of evidence, tens of thousands of pages of evidence from different people, because this prince came back to life after he was dead and said, "This is my kingdom." And of course, the British wanted nothing to do with this because they had taken over his kingdom as they usually do. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you a little bit about this story. During this period, this was in the 1900s, the British ruled India. Um, we can go into this in another episode where the British really had no business being there. The Indians had not waged war on the English, but they just came in because there was plenty of money to be had.
Yeah.
India was not one country as it is now. It was many different kingdoms pieced together. One of these kingdoms was in what is now Bangladesh. It was East Bengal at that time, East Bengal. And the period of this is in the 1900s. And there was a place called, it's not a kingdom really. In English, it may be called a kingdom. In India, it was called a zamindari. Zamindari, it is zameen land. And the king of that, the zamindar, was one person who then died. This country, which was known as Bhawal, Bhawal, the Bhawal was in what is now Bangladesh. It has 570 miles. So even if you just took 200 by 200, it would take you 3 hours at 60 miles per hour driving from one end to the other, from the north to the south. So it's a pretty wide zamindari, and it had 500,000 citizens. These citizens were mostly farmers who gave a part of their earnings to the king, to the zamindar, as taxes. A very rich place. The king of this Bhaval was a person named by Raja Mahendra Kumar Chaudhary. Last name was Chaudhary. Raja means king. He died in 1901.
Mm-hmm.
Story gets very fascinating after this. The king, before he died, had 3 sons and 2 daughters. In India at that time, it was the boys who inherited everything. The girls didn't.
Right.
The girls got married and went into their own respective families. The person we are going to be talking about today was the second son. Therefore, he was known as the second prince, or in India, known as the second Kumar. So in 1901, the zamindar died. In 1904, the British, as was typical of them, said this rich kingdom is being quote unquote mismanaged, so we're taking it over.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say how it was being mismanaged. They just said, okay, we're taking it over. They took it over and said, we're going to keep all the money. In 1905, because the wife, the widow of the king, sued and said, we're not mismanaging it. 1905, it went back to the 3 sons, and the oldest son was ruling it. The second prince, the second Kumar, who we're going to be talking about, who died and then came back to life, was all 3 sons now came into a lot of money. All they did was drink and go as princes were wont to do at that time. They went to houses which now we call them houses of ill repute, but
Mhm.
at that time they were houses meant for princes to fool around in. So they grossly overdrank and hunted with the British with rifles and killed tigers. If you go on the internet, by the way, you're going to see lots of photographs of these Indian princes with their foot and a rifle, foot on the head of a tiger that they have shot. So in 1907, the widow of the queen, of the king, she died.
Mhm.
Then in 1908, the first prince, the oldest brother, died. None of the three boys had any children. So it was easy when all three died for the British to take it over, saying there's no heir, so we're taking it over. Anyway, the second prince was a womanizer and drank a lot, partied, and hunted, and he got syphilis. So there were no kids. The British took it over. And this has to do with the second son, the second Kumar, who was born in 28 July 1884. His name was Ramendra Narayan Rai. And after the queen died, the second Kumar went excessively into alcohol and womanizing. He then got syphilis. And this is an important disease to know because syphilis leaves marks on the body.
Mhm.
And so when he was brought back to life, quote unquote, if that is what happened, the marks would remain on the body of the person that claimed he was the same prince.
Right.
But I'm ahead of myself again. So he got syphilis. Then during that time, his wife was known as Bibhawati. Bibhawati was very unhappy in their marriage because he was a womanizer, drank alcohol, etc. Didn't pay much attention to her. And there are allegations that she was involved in a incestuous relationship with her brother who wanted the kingdom.
Mhm.
There are other allegations that she was involved in a relationship with the doctor who was taking care of her husband, the second prince. And this is important. And there's 26 volumes of evidence from the court. So you have to read through all of these or some books that summarize it. In 1905, after the second Kumar got syphilis, he was 21 at the time, he asked the doctor, who he did not know was having a relationship with his wife, to treat this. Now, there are some other allegations that the doctor was poisoning him. In 1909, 4 years after he got syphilis, the doctor convinced him to go to Darjeeling, which was a hill station in India, to get treatment for his syphilis. So the second Kumar went to Darjeeling with his wife, wife's brother, the doctor, and a whole contingent of his servants. When they went there, he got sicker and sicker. Some people say that the doctor continued to poison him. And in 1909, the second prince died. He died, the cause of death was given as biliary colic. So he died on the 7th of May, 1909. In the 8th of May, he was supposed to be, on the 8th of May, he was supposed to be cremated. Cremation, you build a whole stack of wood
Mhm.
in those days right next to a river, and the wood is set on fire and the body burns. 8th of May, he was supposed to be cremated. But what happened was a sudden rainfall took place. It was monsoon season. The rain came like a hailstorm and so heavy that all the servants ran away from the crematorium. It was that heavy.
Mhm.
And in the process, the body was washed into the river. This is all interesting
Yeah.
because in 1909, at that time, there was somebody, a saint known as Bengali Baba. Bengali means from Bengal. Baba means an older person or a Swami. He was apparently more than 100 years old, and he was sitting by the side of the river downstream from the crematorium, teaching a group of his students how to bring somebody back to life. Somebody bring back to life. I mean, this just sounds so strange,
Yeah.
but that was going on.
Just as
And
this guy happened to float by.
Yeah, well, so there are some other people who said that he actually caused the rains to come and caused this body to flow into the river to him. How far that is true, I mean, I'm just telling you what was in the papers. The other allegations were that he and a band of his students went to the crematorium the night he died and picked up the body from the crematorium and brought it to his own ashram. We don't know which one is true, but because after this whole thing came to light, Bengali Baba was called to court, and he normally just resides up in the caves of the Himalayas, far away from publicity. When the entire Indian population heard that Bengali Baba brought somebody back to life, you can imagine people were coming from all out of the woodwork to go to him to say, do this for me, do that for me. So he just turned around and went back into the Himalayas and was never heard from again by the press.
I want to point out here for everybody that this is not an ancient story in like 400 or 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. This is the early 1900s. This is not fable passed down from generation to generation. This is in a time when people were able to investigate. There was a court case, right?
There were 3 court cases actually.
Yeah.
And just so everybody is aware, this was, some people say, well, it was in India that time. I don't know how much to believe of this. The British courts were involved because, don't forget, this was a very wealthy kingdom that the British had taken over.
Yeah.
And now that this person was coming, quote unquote, back to life, he was claiming the kingdom back. And that meant the British would have to give it up. So the British fought tooth and nail to keep the kingdom and saying that this man was an imposter. And so there were 3 cases fought again and again. The courts ruled in favor of this sadhu who came back to life. And there are voluminous records in England about this. So this is not just Indian newspapers, this is British. So you're right, it was just very recent, number one. And number two, not just the Indian newspapers, but also the British newspapers and court records show this.
Sounds like a story in scriptures from thousands of years ago, but no, this is relatively modern times.
Relatively modern. And we have photographs.
Yep. Oh,
okay. Yeah. I wish I could show it here, but maybe at the end of this, we'll tell you how to contact me, friends, and then you can contact me anything you want in reference to this. I have volumes and volumes of paperwork on this, and I'll be happy to send it to you. So Bengali Baba was sitting with his students on the side of the river. Along comes this body, and the students take the body, which is wrapped up at that time, completely wrapped up like an Egyptian mummy in white muslin. And don't forget, this was a prince, a king, very wealthy. So you can imagine that he was wrapped up very nicely, not just an ordinary person being wrapped. So he was picked up from the river, brought to Bengali Baba, who did whatever he does to bring somebody back to life. Yeah. And by the way, there is a book called Life with the Himalayan Masters by Swami Rama. Life with the Himalayan Masters. I think that's the name. If you get a chance, you should read it. Swami Rama was a disciple of Bengali Baba. And when he learned whatever he learned from Bengali Baba, Bengali Baba told him to go to the US. And Swami Rama said, I want to continue living here with you in the Himalayas. And Bengali Baba said, no, you speak English well, you've been to school, you've been to college, you need to go and expose this to the Western world. And Swami Rama came to the United States. He was on the Sullivan, Phil Sullivan?
Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan show. You can look that up on YouTube. And Ed Sullivan show, he did all kinds of miracles, so much so that various hospitals asked him to come to show them if this is in fact true. The Menninger Institute in Topeka, Kansas, asked him to come there, stayed there for a week with them, and they put all of this into medical journals. They couldn't believe it, that he could use his mind to bend metal, to move inanimate objects from one part to another. He did all kinds of things, but he always gave credit to his master, which was Bengali Baba, and said, I'm just a fraction of what my master can do. And in that book, Life of the Himalayan Masters, Life with the Himalayan Masters, he writes that Bengali Baba would teach them how to bring dead beings back to life. He gave an example of insects, ants, other things that Bengali Baba would cut, kill, and then put back to life and have them come back again. It's going off the track a little bit, but Bengali Baba was sitting by the river. This corpse was washing by. He said to the students, pick up that corpse, bring it here. And then he brought this prince back to life. Okay, so after he brought this prince back to life, I mean, a dead person coming back to life, I have no idea what it's like. But, but this person had no memory at all of anything. Didn't know who he was, didn't know. I mean, it was like a baby being born, except that it's an adult body.
Right.
The body was the same. It still had all the marks of this syphilis, etc. He had all kinds of other diseases. All of that was there. And he did not even remember a language to speak. So he spoke in whatever language the Bengali Baba and his students spoke in, which was not the same as the language he was used to speaking when he was the prince. This is interesting and important. So for 12 years, he stayed with Bengali Baba. Surprisingly, Bengali Baba, with whatever he did, got rid of the syphilis, cured it in ways that modern medicine could not cure it when the prince was alive. He cured the syphilis, he cured all of his other ailments, and the Prince of Bahwal was now in tip-top shape and very happy and very much at peace. And Bengali Baba said, look, this is your second lease on life. Just stay with us. Be my disciple. And I promise you, you will create great happiness, peace, etc. And the prince did that without knowing that he was the prince or whatever. He stayed there with no clothes except a loincloth, like all the other students and like Bengali Baba, with ashes all over his body and long matted hair. And all he did was meditate with Bengali Baba every day. They did yoga and they did meditation. 12 years later, Bengali Baba told him to go to Dhaka. Dhaka. Dhaka is now in Bangladesh. And so he said, go there and beg for alms. Now, obviously, Bengali Baba, who could see into the future, see into the past, had some reason for doing this. And part of that reason may have been that the widow and her doctor and her brother were together taking advantage of these tenants, the farmers, etc., and doing a lot of bad things. So Bengali Baba told the prince, without telling him that you are the prince, he said, go into Dhaka and beg for alms and spread the word over there. So the prince now shows up in Dhaka, where his widow, who he didn't remember, is living with her brother, quote unquote, and living also with the doctor. Mm-hmm. The other two princes had by this time died, so there were no heirs to the king's kingdom, and the British had taken over. The colonial British court of wards. So this was the court of wards. There were no wards left because there were no kids, and the British took over the estate. In 12 years, while the prince was dead, quote unquote, Biba Bhabi was in charge of the estate under the British court of wards. The way that worked is the British took most of the money, and then a small stipend was given to the widow.
Right.
In 1921, 12 years after the prince died, a sadhu appeared in Dhaka, which is now Bangladesh, a sannyasi, naked except for a loincloth, covered in ashes, long matted hair, dirty, and around asking with a begging bowl, asking for alms. So the tenant farmers who knew this king kept looking at him and saying, this is our king, this is our prince, but he died 12 years ago. The rumors were that he looks like the dead Raja. So they went to the wife and said, your husband has come back, except that he's come back as a sadhu covered with ashes. The wife said, impossible. She wanted nothing to do with it because now she knew that he would come back and she would have to give up all the money she was getting. But the sisters came and said, we want to see this person. They came onto the streets, saw him, looked at him, and without question said, we identify him as the Kumar, the second Kumar, our brother. The British courts of wards were the imperial administrators of the Bawal estate at that time. They rejected the claim outright. They said this was not the real prince. So did his wife, Bibawati. That was in 1921.
Mhm.
In 1930, 9 years later, the prince started regaining some of his memory. People refreshed his memory. His tenant farmers started paying rent to him. They said, we refuse to pay to anybody else. We recognize you as the king. He started getting the money, got some money from the tenants, and he got himself lawyers. And in 1930, a lawsuit was filed in court by the Sadhu. By this time, he was not known as the prince, but he was known as the Sadhu. Sadhu means a saint, somebody like him.
Yeah.
In 1936, 6 years after he filed the lawsuit, the court, the Indian court, ruled in his favor. They listened to all the evidence. They called in Bengali Baba. They said, this is unbelievable, but yes, it definitely appears to be this person. And they got all kinds of other evidence, including marks on his body, etc. So the court in 1936 ruled in his favor. But the British Court of Wards and the widow appealed to the Calcutta High Court and said, this can't be. Look how many times this thing went to court,
Yeah.
and how many times it was ruled in favor of the Sadhu. So she then appealed to the Privy Council in London. So the London court appointed a 3-judge panel to look over this case. They said, okay, enough times this has gone back and forth in court. 3 judges, of which 2 were sent from London to say, maybe these Indian judges are ruling one way. How can a dead person come back to life? Right. Sent 2 white British judges to India to oversee this. So 3 judges were appointed from London, and they heard the case. And so much material was collected. And there were British journalists in Calcutta at the time listening to all of that and putting this all down in the British newspapers. So it's available there. In 1946, maybe 10 years after the first case was declared in the Sadhu's favor, in 1946, July, the court again ruled in favor of the Sadhu. So every time the courts heard it, after a lot of evidence was presented, the courts ultimately ruled in favor of the Sadhu. This time it was final, and the Sadhu was given back his estate, his entire kingdom. And the Bengali Baba had told him, he said, look, if you're going to do this, do it. But the minute you get your satisfaction that you've got the kingdom and the kingdom is back in your control, then come back to me. And we'll go up into the Himalayas, and we won't deal with these material aspects of the world anymore, because your life here is done. Mm-hmm. True to his word, what happened was, when the court ruled this, the Sadhu, the prince now, had a stroke and he died on the spot. So the wife, the widow said, this is justice. She said, look, he didn't belong in it. He didn't. Instead of saying that she gave up the material desires for what he was, because he just wanted it for justice, not for himself. But the Sadhu died the very same or next day after the court ruling. This was 37 years after his first death in 1909. So there were now 2 funerals, one in 1909 and the second one in 1946. So after he died, the courts said, we just want to make sure that what did we rule was correct. Do a forensic examination of his entire body, including a post-mortem examination of the interior of his body, and write up a report. So that report, if you look at it, it's fascinating. They've taken from the original doctor's reports all of the signs and symptoms that this marks on the body that the prince had. So the first doctor, who was the widow's paramour, had said that he had marks on this part of his body, that part of his body from the syphilis. He also pointed out birthmarks and other distinguishing scars on the body that he had. Out of 21 of them that the doctor had pointed out and his family members, this corpse, after postmortem, was found to have 19 of the 21 exactly where the first prince had it. So it
Wow.
was too much of a coincidence to say
Right.
this was an imposter. So 19 out of 21 physical identification marks were identical. So nobody could explain exactly how does this happen? What happened? How did this person come back to life? How did he not know the language? He couldn't speak the language. He was speaking in a different language.
Yeah.
And then slowly, after many years of being in that area, the language came back, but he was speaking in not the best language. It was broken, like a person coming to a country for the first time.
Right.
There are books that if you want to read, you could. One is by the biggest book and with the most detail is by a lady by the name of Partha Chatterjee. I'm not sure if Partha is a woman or a man. Partha Chatterjee, and the book is called A Princely Imposter. I haven't read it myself. The second book is Murad Faizi, which is titled A Prince, a Poison, and Two Funerals.
Hmm.
There are many movies, both in Britain as well as in India, made on this topic. And there's much on the internet about Bengali Baba. Now, Bengali Baba, if you, my friends, were to look it up on the internet, it'll say that he was alive for over 160 years. Nobody knew or knows how he died. He was born in 1730, is what it says. But this thing took place in 1909. How long was that? What, almost 200 years. Anyway, the other books that you should read is called Living with Himalayan Masters by Swami Rama, who was a disciple of Bengali Baba. And then a book called Autobiography of a Yogi. Autobiography of a Yogi is written by Paramahansa Yogananda. Paramahansa Yogananda Lu was somebody who studied under a guru called Yukteswar. And he spoke English well, just like Swami Rama, went to college in India, went to Indian schools. And his guru, his teacher, told him, you've got to go to the United States. So he came here, Yogananda. And if you look, there's a documentary called Awake. It's on Prime Video, Amazon Prime. And he came here, had a huge following back in 1930s. And he talks of Bengali Baba, Swami Rama, etc. And it was so important. You'll find this fascinating. It's an aside from what we were talking about before. But Paramahansa Yogananda, who was a student of a student of a student of Bengali Baba, was so good in his book that he wrote called Autobiography of a Yogi. Have you heard of this book, Lou?
No, I haven't. No.
Autobiography of a Yogi was so important that Steve Jobs, when he first heard of it, read it, was fascinated, went to India, and went to India multiple times thereafter to follow up on what he learned from the book. And some say that it was that which gave him the idea to put an apple with a bite taken out of it as the logo of his company. And
Really?
yeah, also that it was because of that and meditation that he was able to meditate and concentrate and get to the level that he did of perfectionism when he created the company. When he died, the only book that Steve Jobs had on his iPad was Autobiography of a Yogi. And he said that during his memorial service, after he died, he wanted a copy of the book given to every person that attended his memorial service.
Wow.
Similarly, George Harrison of the Beatles was so turned, he said it was because of this book, Autobiography of a Yogi, that he was alive still. He says, otherwise I'd be dead long time ago from drugs or whatever else. He says, not only am I alive, I feel happy, content, and good because of this book. And he said he bought hundreds of books and kept them in his home. And every person that he was close to, when they came to his house, he would give a copy of this autobiography of a yogi.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look, Babaji's photograph Bengali Baba's photograph, is on the cover of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band.
Oh, he is. Oh,
Yeah. So there's many other things, other books. Apprentice to a Himalayan Master by Sri M. The Incredible Life of a Himalayan Yogi. The Times, Teachings, and Life of Baba Loknath Brahmachari, who's Bengali Baba. And A Search in Secret India, A Western Perspective. So, friends, this podcast called Ancient Stories is all about these kind of stories that I'll be telling you with Lou. Lou and I together will be bringing you these stories. I hope you find them interesting. I hope you can write to Lou and me and tell us what you want in these stories. Otherwise, I'll keep bringing you stuff like this. I hope you've listened to episode 1 and episode 2, where we talk of Scandinavia and how the ancient Vedic Aryans moved across the Europe. So arisearjuna@gmail.com is the email to which you can write. Right, Lou?
that's right. arisejuna@gmail.com.
Anything else that we need to tell the listeners?
No, it's a fascinating story, and it's like it ends in 1946. Again, it sounds like such an ancient fable, and this happened in mid-century in the 20th century. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, very recent.
Yep.
All
Fascinating.
right,
Great
friends.
story.
Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.